Everybody. So I wanted to do a little live on Instagram for the same topic as I did on Facebook or related. Because it is an important topic, I was asked if some people kind of have convenient depression to get out of doing stuff. No, not unless they're like a big sociopath or they have some personality disorder where I mean, honestly, if somebody is like faking depression, there's like so much weird shit going on there. And I say that in only the most clinical of ways, meaning that they have like an extensive trauma history, probably, and probably like the only time that they were ever treated well, maybe as a kid, was when they were sick. I mean, I've seen like a lot of stuff, in my life, but working with clients, but faking depression is usually not something that is common. So then some guys say, well, my wife says that she struggles with depression and that's why we can't have sex. What else is she doing? Is she basically just laying around miserable, feeling like garbage about herself, overeating, oversleeping, these being the vegetative symptoms of atypical depression most commonly seen in women? Does she feel like garbage about herself in general? Is everything negative? Does she kind of forget stuff a lot? Does she feel overwhelmed, unfocused, and she's not really being her best self as a mom either? Well, then she's depressed. Yes, and she doesn't want to have sex. Would it be great if she did? Yeah, sure. I hope she does. But she ain't going to because she has pretty bad depression. And your job would be to get her in with a therapist and a psychiatrist and hope that she's one of the people that responds to therapy or medication. So, sorry. So, is it possible to have a good sex life when you're depressed? Well, yeah. I mean, there's all different levels of depression. They did some study years ago that, in fact, showed that women who have more migraines have higher sex drives. So, the brain works in mysterious ways. I'll tell you, as somebody who struggled with treatment-resistant depression for my whole life, oh, there was an alarm. It's certainly possible to have a good sex life, but the point is you have to feel supported at home. Because you don't feel good about yourself a lot of the time. You feel tired, you feel out of sorts, you feel like you're not killing it on all cylinders. And if you have somebody that's like sitting there like, oh, isn't it your turn to do this? Or why are you just laying around? Well, man, I wouldn't sleep with that person either, But if you have somebody who's there supporting you and loving you, particularly if you're somebody with a physical touch love language, then yeah, you can have a decent sex life. If you're not severely depressed, if you have mild to moderate depression, yes, you could still have enjoyable sex sometimes, just like you could do a lot of other enjoyable things sometimes. If you have severe depression, if your wife or your husband has severe depression to the point that they are laying around, they're barely going to work, they can't really parent, then to think that somehow they're faking this so they get out of having sex with you is real self-centered. Nobody wants to be living like they're living. They're not happy. They're in no way proud of themselves. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. So the best way to deal with a partner who says that they can't have sex because they're depressed is to try to help them as you would if they were sick, to try to get them treatment, to try to help in any way that you can around the house. If it really is depression, then it will wax and wane, by the way. It won't be, for 20 years my wife has struggled with depression to the point that we can't have sex, unless your wife is really intractably depressed to the point that she pretty much has to go inpatient and is trying multiple medications all of the time, and then her life sucks, so like in her mind it's a struggle to be even there. So I mean, your sex life is kind of the least of her problems. Does this mean that you should stay? No, some people don't want to stay. Some people do want to stay. Some people, though, what I do want to prevent is people thinking that somebody's faking depressed. If somebody's faking depressed, there's so much personality disorder level stuff at play that this is an even more severe of a mental issue than you had realized. The idea of faking depression is not something that is at all prevalent. That's something on the level of Munchausen's, And it isn't something that is real. The majority of people who say that they're depressed, they are depressed. Their depression waxes and wanes, different times of the year, different, and anything. Sometimes a med works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes a therapy works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes a positive thing will happen and that temporarily lifts your mood. There's all sorts of stuff that can happen. Seasons, whatever. But if somebody's going to say, we haven't had sex in 20 years because my wife is depressed, I'll say there's some more going on. Because if your wife loves you, unless, again, she's so severely depressed that she cannot get out of bed for 20 years, in which case, again, you have bigger fish to fry, it isn't going to be like that. But in the case that she's struggling with mild to moderate depression and she can still go to work and she can still parent, but she's just not having sex with you, then that is certainly a relationship issue and a couple's issue. Perhaps she doesn't understand about responsive desire. Perhaps there's been many empathic ruptures. Perhaps she's not in love with you anymore. I mean, there could be a million different variables. But if somebody is literally laying around like a sick thing, cannot do anything, basically looks like a beaten animal laying on your couch, and like you're thinking that they're faking, who wants to look like that in front of their children? Like, that isn't something that feels good, you know? So nobody's really faking depression unless, again, there's some superordinate mental illness going on, which is in fact, ironically, more severe than depression, you know, in as much as it's harder to understand and it's a more of a personality level thing. So if you've told yourself that this is a reason, like that things are not happening in the bedroom, you got to look in at your relationship too. Because most women and men with mild depression can still feel in love and have sex, you know, especially if the marriage is good. And I just did a podcast on this. You can't change somebody from being somebody with depression to not being somebody with depression, but you can change them from being a person with depression who hates their marriage to a person with depression who doesn't hate their marriage. And in the latter case, you got a lot more options and a lot more likelihood of having physical or emotional intimacy. So I hope this was useful. I'll talk to y'all soon.